Today I'm going to show you how to use a virtual studio to practice and experiment with studio lighting. Lindsay Adler here, and there's nothing that I love more than playing around in the studio. I love light, I love to teach, and this is why I have so many lighting tutorials. I've got Master Studio Lighting, Creative Studio Lighting, The Magic of Gels, and so much more because I love light and I love for others to love light. But when I speak to other photographers, there often seems like there's something holding them back in the studio. Maybe they don't have a model to practice on. Maybe they don't have a studio space. That happens to a lot of us. Or maybe they feel like they don't have the gear that they need to practice. Well, guess what, everybody? There is a solution so that all of you can still learn, still experiment, no matter what your circumstances are. I've been using a virtual studio called Set.a.Light 3D. What it does is it simulates what it's like to shoot in a studio space. You can change the number of lights, the modifiers, the position of the light, the subject pose, all of these things. You can even simulate the size of your own shooting space, and you can even simulate that you're working with the same gear you already own, or you can go ahead and try out new tools. So you can actually see what it's like in real life. Now, I'd like to take a moment to walk you through the essentials of this tool, of this program, so that you can practice studio lighting no matter your circumstances. When you open Set.a.Light 3D, the first thing it asks you to do is choose the size of the room that you're going to be shooting in. Here's the thing. There isn't a right or wrong answer for this. When you're shooting and choosing a large room, that means that you're going to have less problems worrying about the spill or bounce of light. However, it may be unrealistic to your actual shooting space, and so you might choose a medium or a small room. I tend to use medium as a starting point. And so when you get a new project, you're given this generic setup, a 2-light setup with some essential modifiers, and you can begin to modify from there. So I want to show you first what you're looking at overall, and then we can begin to make adjustments to our setup. All right, so first of all, you have a screen giving you an overview of the entire setup, including the background, the lights, all of these things you can change. And then you also have an overhead view. You'll be able to make adjustments from either area. All right, so let's actually take a look at how to adjust our strobes. Now, to make an adjustment to something in the scene, you click on it. But there are a few different ways you can change these elements. So first of all, you see the up and down arrow? It makes sense. This is for adjusting the height, and you can see in real time how it is affecting your subject. And it takes a moment to render the lighting accurately, but you see it pretty real time. All right, next you see the arrows on the ground. This is for moving the light around the subject, changing the angle. And then finally, you have the arrows on the modifier itself, which allows you to change the pivot or the angle of the light side to side, up and down. Now, for any of these things, you're actually going to want to click and hold. And although they're relatively straightforward, it takes a little bit getting used to. So if you're struggling, don't worry, it's not just you. It takes a little bit of practice, but you'll have it in no time. Now, when I select a light, you'll see that there are several other options that pop up, and you should be familiar with them. First of all, if you're using multiple lights, you can actually turn each light off individually so you can see what every light is actually doing to your subject. In the studio, in real life, I do this all the time. I'll turn one light off or on so I can see the effect it's having on the shot. Something that you may also find very useful if you are moving your subject around the scene is to turn on this icon here. And what it does is it automatically rotates the light towards your model no matter where you move the light. And so it kind of locks it in place. So for example, if I move the light around, see how it's tracing her, it's following her no matter where I am. Same thing if I change the height. It's going to lock on her. So notice when it's low, it's still pointed at her. So I find that very useful, especially if I move the light and it is no longer pointed in the right direction. You just click it on and it'll lock it in place. There are a few other things that you may find useful here. You can actually point the light into something else, to a different part of the body, and lock it on the target. But for the most part, I'm using this to point at the subject or their face. Okay, so now what else can we change? What else can we adjust in this scene? As you might have assumed, you can change the power output of the light, and you can change the modifiers. Now, what's interesting about this program, and it's helpful, it may be confusing to you at first, there's actually several places to make adjustments. For example, I can change the position by moving the light. I can do it over here. I can do it in the top-down view. Same thing with changing the modifiers. I usually do it from here. And they call it a light former. You may be familiar with modifiers or light shaper. Same idea. And so when we click on this, I can change my modifier to be whatever I want it to be. An octabox, for example. All right. But then, as you may know, there are actually different ways you can modify a softbox, an octabox. For example, you can add a grid. Well, when you click on the change modifier here, you don't have those options, but over on the left-hand side, there's something called variants. And so basically for each light modifier, if you can add a grid or you can add barn doors or whatever else you can change, you'll find it over on the left-hand side under variants. And so notice I can add a grid. And so now my light will now have the grid on it, and I can remove it whenever I want. All right, now anytime that you want to delete a light or change it, you simply click and then you hit delete and it will remove it from the scene. But let's say that you want to add another light of some sort. Where I usually do it is down here and where the timeline was. Over here you click on monolight. You can scroll and you can pick your modifier from here. And then when you select it, double click, it'll add it to the scene. And so if you notice over here on the right hand side in your camera's preview, you can actually move your camera and it shows you what the camera sees. So obviously the light is currently in the way. And if you just try to grab the light and move it, you'll struggle. See how it's moving up and down? You do actually have to click the correct arrows. So when I want to move it side to side around the subject, I have to click on the arrows in the bottom to move it around. If I want it to lock onto my subject, remember, click on this icon. It will lock onto her. If I want to move it closer to her, I can actually do that from either view. But again, I can move it from the top-down angle so I can see how close it is. And then I can change the height from here. So just keep in mind which arrow you grab is really important. Now, so far, you'll notice that it looks like I'm locked onto this single view of the scene. You can actually change. You get more of a top-down view. You can move to the side so you can see your scene a little bit better. And that takes place over here in the right-hand side of this main view. One of the things that you may find confusing, I actually struggled with in the beginning, is you can't just click these items. You have to actually click, hold it, and then drag with your mouse or your trackpad. So if I want to zoom in, right now I'm clicking and then I'm dragging up to zoom in or back down to zoom out. And then here I can click and drag to change my view left, right, up and down. So play with this. It'll take a little bit of getting used to, but it's actually pretty easy once you get the hang of it. A couple other things you can change in your scene. You can, of course, change your background. Click on that. You can change the height. And what's nice, you can actually choose specific colors. And so if you come down here to color, you can set one just by selecting from a color wheel or any hue that you want. Or you can use real standard colors of backgrounds. So for example, I shoot with Savage backgrounds, and so I'm used to using a storm gray, or there's black, so you can actually simulate the actual colors of the backgrounds that you are comfortable using. So that is actually, I find, quite useful. All right, next up, I mentioned that anything in this main scene you can change. You saw that I could change the modifiers and the grids. You can also change the strobe itself, so you can change how much the output is. So if the light's appearing too dark, you could change from 500 watt to 1,000. Now, if you're trying to actually simulate the gear that you own, you wouldn't want to just be changing the wattage, because you actually want it to represent the lights that you have. So the next thing that comes into play is you can actually change your camera settings. And so you can change your f-stop, you can change your ISO, you can change your focal length, and all of these things can be adjusted in the top right. So let's say that you're noticing with your scene that you're up full power on your light, all the way up, and it's still not bright enough. Well, one of the things I could do is I could come over here and I could go and open up my aperture from f8 to maybe 5.6, and it brightens up the entire scene. Or I could go from ISO 100 to 200, everything gets brighter, and then I can go in and individually adjust the output of each of the strobes to get my exposure correct. Also, if you don't know what correct exposure would be, you also have a histogram that you could work with to help you judge your exposure. So you can turn that on and off as well. All right, so we've changed the lights, we've changed the background, we've changed the camera, we've changed everything except our model. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but when you select your model, you actually have a ton of different options that come up. So you can change the hairstyle of your model, you can change the hair color of your model. You can actually change the model just overall. If you go down here to where the timeline is, I could just pick a different person altogether. From there, you can change their clothing, and so I can, change it to a totally different outfit, and then each of the elements in that outfit, I can change the color, glasses, eye color, skin color, makeup, like you name it. I won't spend too much time here. Honestly, when you're just learning to experiment with the lighting, it's less important. But I do tend to work with the hair pulled back because sometimes the hair gets in the way and I don't really see how it's sculpting the face. So that's a suggestion I would make, especially if you're just trying to watch how the light falls on the subject. A couple other things that you might want to check out is you can actually change if the subject is making eye contact with the camera. And you can also change if their head is turned towards camera or away. It's really creepy when you first start off. But this is useful if you want to see straight on and your subject looking at camera, and then you want to move the light around to see the effect that it's making. And if you got really into this, there's a posing mode where I can grab individual parts of the subject, change their pose, the hand, the shoulder, the elbow, you name it. If you're actually trying to build a scene and recreate a shot, you may want to do this. But if you're simply trying to study and understand lighting, most of the time you'll simply need to change the angle of the head. Now, as you can see, there is a ton that you can change. And what you can do is you can start looking at photographs that you like the lighting and try to analyze them and recreate it in your virtual studio. Or you can use one of my many tutorials that actually take you through how to do the lighting setup. And I tell you the modifier, the distance of light, the power of light, and you can recreate it there so that you can practice and put these lessons to the test. And one of the things I recommend as well is simply experimenting to learn. And then when you can get into a studio or when you have access to gear, you'll have created setups for yourself. And so what's really nice is if you lock something in place where you love what it's looking like, what you can do is you can create a snapshot of that. You click on the snapshot. And if you want to take a look at the setup, I can actually then get the power of the light, the distance of the light, everything that you can possibly wonder about this lighting setup. And I can export it, save it for myself, and then later on put it to practice in real life in the studio. I hope you've enjoyed the walkthrough of the essentials of this virtual studio. Now, if you're interested in this program, if you want to try it out, I've actually got a discount code for all of you, and it's in the description below. Also, be sure to check out one of my many lighting tutorials so you can put the knowledge and this studio to the test, no matter where you are, no matter what gear you have. I'll see you next time.